I think we stopped off yesterday in our discussion about how our mind has become entangled with the outer world through our senses and bound up with the law of karma in terms of that almost all of our actions are based on wanting to satisfy or get a hold of or hold on to pleasurable feelings and to get away from unpleasant feelings or painful feelings. And really, if you check up in your life, you'll see that there's a lot of truth to that. And it also, because pleasurable and painful feelings are bound up with the past in the future. Because basically it's our memory in the mind, everything we've experienced since we were a baby, we've remembered, and we've been repeating our actions and reactions and habits towards all of these objects over and over and over and over again, creating this tangle within the brain and the world that it becomes very hard to get out of because no one has really taught us about that. And also yesterday we talked about the idea of the young baby when he's born and how the past and the future are born in the mind because of these pleasurable and painful feelings. It was first acquired when it was a young baby, and of course it continued through the whole life. And that the first stage of disentangling this tangle is learning how to get recentered in the body. I mentioned the mind of the baby is basically fused together and was at one, in a state of oneness, you could say, with the body. Because consciousness went into every cell of the body. It makes up this solid 100 or more pound body. Every single cell in there has awareness. And awareness is part of the mind. So really you can't separate the body and mind at least a kind of ordinary level. But we've lost that connection to it. And as I've already mentioned. So anyway, today I want to go into talking more about the mental process of feeling and perception and volition. And these are also part of the four foundations of mindfulness and the five aggregates. So within the Buddhist teachings on meditation, the four foundations of mindfulness are the method for developing the kind of mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom that will allow us to, in fact, disentangle this tangle. And the five aggregates are really the objects of that, of the four foundations of the mindfulness. And the first one is the body. We've already talked about that pretty much. That this body really is the outer shell for the mind, or you could say the house, the home for this mind. And people talk about they live in a house someplace, right? You have an address, this house is an address 25725 Long Corner Road, right? So people think I live here. Okay, it may be a house where we have retreats and tend to the garden and other things like that, or in any house, but we really live within this body, because that's where we experience the world, really, and where the world is created in terms of our consciousness. Now, when we experience sense objects through the senses, when we see something, hear, taste, smell, touch, something, that produces a vibration. In other words, when you see something, you're looking here, what you're actually seeing is some sort of electromagnetic energy, or some kind of, energy or color striking your eye, color in a certain shape, and also sounds are going there. So there's color and there's sound vibrations. And that's all that you really can see or hear. The mind does everything else. And so what we call whenever the sense organs are impacted, that sets up a vibration in the nervous system. And as it's going from the senses to the brain, it produces a certain kind of vibration that's sensed by the mind as this incoming vibration is something unpleasant, or it's something pleasant, or it's a neutral. And this is because of the past conditioning. And so that vibration itself actually is the matter, the form, but it's perceived as something pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, and that's called the Vedana, or the feeling. And ever since the baby's experience with the chocolate, that particular sweet taste produces the pleasant feeling, but actually it was just a vibration moving through the senses. But that's remembered. So, and then that's what we get attached to. It's the feelings that we want, because that's what drives everybody's life. You want to have pleasurable feeling and to avoid painful feeling. Now perception, so the feeling is the second aggregate. So we have form, feeling. Form is the material vibration itself, but feeling is the tone. We call the feeling tone of that vibration. So they're not two different things. They're kind of like just two sides of a coin, heads and tails. One side is the physical vibration, the other side is the tone of either being something pleasant, painful, or neutral. And then we perceive it. And really, perception is one of the very important, because that's actually the mental pictures of the objects. So how many of you, let's say when your eyes are closed and you're meditating and you hear a particular sound? Now, what do you normally say? You say, "Oh, I hear a bird chirping." Well, that's a picture in your mind. But you're hearing a sound, actually, is what you're hearing. But the mind is creating this mental memory or image. It can be a very visual image too, right? So you have very vivid visual images, or it can just be a kind of just a mental label. But anyway, that's the perception. And it's perceived as to being some kind of actual object. And that object is connected to this painful, pleasant, or neutral memory. So whenever we see the same object again, it recreates this either attraction or aversion, or neutral feeling. So like anything that you've ever seen, you look around a room and you see things, if you see books and you happen to be a scholar, then you might get a pleasant feeling, oh, he's got some books. Or if you see a mouse crawling along the floor, you might, ow. So, these objects produce these conditioned feelings in people. But people react to them as they are really real. But every person would experience it in a different way. That's why these feelings are not absolute feelings. A particular object doesn't have an absolute value of being ugly or painful or beautiful, because people are going to experience it and have experiences from their past of a different nature. So people might argue over what one person thinks is a beautiful artwork or good music. One might not like it at all. Some other person might be indifferent, right? So that's important to understand, because those feelings are conditioned. They're just basically programmed into us. No different really than a computer program. Because as a young child, you don't have much ability to discriminate, or as you grow older and you just keep repeating these kind of habits. And people may fight and kill over their opinions of what is beautiful, ugly, right or wrong, and so on. And even about ideas too. We can see that's really true in this current political kind of age that we're in. People are really clinging to their theories about even what is truth and so on. And it causes a lot of suffering. And so that's part of this entanglement, that the mind has become entangled in this web of perceptions and feelings. Now, it's usually at this point where I relate an interesting story from my own childhood about these feelings and perceptions, and how it causes people a lot of grief and suffering, because they're clinging to these experiences as being some absolute truth. So when I was a young boy in California, we lived near an avocado orchard. And we could actually just go and pick up avocados on the ground when we wanted to. And my mother used to make salads out of avocados during the season, 2 or 3 times a week. Because, now avocados are very expensive. In those days, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, and they probably weren't. But anyway, I hated avocados, and I don't know why. But I suffered a lot over thinking avocados were evil. And just the fact that my mother saying, oh, tonight we're going to have can you go get some avocados? We're going to have avocado salad. A chill kind of went up my spine, kind of a chill where you're like that, the hair stands on you. And then immediately I started worrying, oh my gosh, again, what am I going to do? And so just hearing the word, I got the chill, because that word now connected back to the previous aversion that I had from avocados. I wasn't hearing it for the first time. I was reacting to the past only. And then I would, go around and hunt for our cat, or our Mita, not the one here, and bring it inside the house. And I'll explain why later. So anyway, so I spent a lot of time worrying about, oh no, tonight we're going to have avocados. And then when we came to the dinner table, and my mother actually brought them to the table, and I saw them, another kind of chill went up my spine. And then when I had to bring them close to the nose and smell them, sometimes I would have a gag reflex. When I actually had to put it in my mouth and chew it, another gag reflex. And even once or twice, I maybe even had vomited. But anyway, a very unpleasant experience. So I suffered in basically 5 ways about just hearing about the avocado. I suffered by just hearing the word avocado, and then thinking about the avocado, that I would have to eat it, and then smelling it and tasting it. I had these negative reactions. But my mother and father and brother, they loved avocados. They were woofing them down. But I couldn't go watch TV, Leave It to Beaver, Ricky Nelson show, until I finished my dinner. But coming back to the cat for some reason liked avocados. I don't know how. Maybe we were related in the last life. I don't know. But so when my parents weren't looking, I would feed a piece of avocado to the cat who was camped out by my feet. And then after my parents, everybody finished the dinner, they went to watch TV, and I had to stay at the dinner table to finish. Then I would feed the rest of the avocados to the cat. And then I would take my plate to my mom. Hey, Mom, I finished my dinner. And she would say, good boy. But then what did I do? What did I do then? I told a lie to my own mother. Can you believe that? So that's the point. Our belief that things are, clinging to our ideas of what is good and what is bad can lead us to these unwholesome actions. And that's the main point. So that's not the end of the story, however. So later, when I went to India some years later, I started hearing about the Dhamma. And, I also went to a yoga ashram, and the yoga teacher, Swami Dityananda, he was extolling the virtues of avocados, saying they were one of the most, wholesome, beneficial fruits. And then also I had taken a meditation course by that time too, and it was learning something about the mind and so on. So I said, I'm going to test this Dhamma. I'm going to see if I can actually change my mind about avocados. So I got a bag of avocados and went to work. So first I'd have to mix it with some other food and hold my nose. And in the beginning I would have some kind of gag reflex, but I kept on telling myself, avocados are good, avocados are healthy. He kept on repeating that. And little by little, I would stop that kind of negative reaction, or it would get less and less over several days. Finally, I could take my hand off my nose, and then I could stop mixing it with other food. And after a few weeks, that painful feeling, aversion, kind of morphed into an indifferent feeling. And then I gradually started liking them. And now I love avocados, as everybody knows. But one of the instigating factors, because it was a healthy fruit, and I was in the yoga then too, so naturally thinking about health too. But more importantly, to see if I could actually change my attitude about the avocados. So if you can change your attitude about avocados, you could probably change it about a lot of other things too. I haven't necessarily changed my attitude about every thing that I may not have cared for when I was young. But so anyway, this is just, I mentioned this just to illustrate the idea that we go through a lot of suffering just because we're clinging on to our past experiences and beliefs about things that are good or bad, true or false. And we can see that probably everything in the world, every political belief, every religious belief, every object, more than half the people in the world are going to have different opinions about it, or more. And most of the wars and crime in the world are connected with that. That means being addicted to these feelings and perceptions. And then they get us, that's what really gets us entangled with the law of karma, to the extent that it can lead people to committing suicide and committing every kind of horrible crime in the books. So that's why it's so important to, for understanding the mind. And it would be wonderful if this kind of, teaching and information would be taught to people when they're younger. It might be able to save them a lot of grief. But some people will even grow older to old age, still caught and deeply entangled in the tangle, even like before they die. So, having said that much, now I want to come back to the process, continuing in that process. So, normally we think we like objects. Usually it's the object we think we like, right? You see something, I want that beautiful shirt or dress or shoes or person or a house or some gadget that you see in the store. And you think you need those things, or want those things. But actually, it's the feeling that we want. It's the feeling that we perceive that object is going to give us that we really want. Because it's a very common experience, maybe in your own experience. You think you'd wanted something. You had this desire to have something. You think you need that object, maybe a gadget for the kitchen or a new pair of, some clothing or some tool. And so you go and get it. And now you actually have the object, but very quickly you lose your interest in it. or it's no longer an object of desire, because it's the desire that's craving. It's the desire and wanting that's actually the suffering. And so we want to overcome that desire by fulfilling the desire. The objects are really not that necessary or important, but it's getting the feeling, overcoming the painful feeling, it's important, or satisfying the desire for the pleasurable feeling that's important. And I also usually give the example, it's especially apparent in relationships, right? So maybe when you're younger and you have some first relationships and so on, and usually that's based on a mutual support or some mutual feedback each person gets from the other, right? But at some point, the other person might start doing things that change your perception about it, or no longer fulfill your happiness. Like, looking at others or, perhaps other things. And so then we might lose interest or say, I don't like you anymore. And then we want to maybe get somebody else, change them, because it's no longer producing that feeling. So it's very illustrative about how the objects in themselves are not really that important. It's the feeling that the object is giving us that's really important. Whether it's a painful feeling that you want to get rid of, or it's a pleasurable feeling that you want to, to have. And that's where the kind of the delusion arises about how the objects in themselves have a satisfying power. Now, of course, there are some objects that you may be satisfied with the whole life, or something like that, but there's probably a few and far between. And everything else, you outgrow that. Kids outgrow the need for their toys, and, through the whole life, right? Your life is changing, your mind is changing, then you lose interest in things you used to do. And acquire new ones. And that includes food, it includes music, things you wear. And a lot of it is simply because we need to do something. And I'll talk more about that later. But again, we spend a lot of time planning, scheming, getting arguments with our spouse or our other roommates or family members about what they want to do. Get into big arguments, right? So over where are we going to go for dinner on Tuesday night, or where are we going to go on vacation? I mean, there's been divorces over that kind of stuff. For what? You're just tightly holding on to these ideas that ultimately have no permanent sort of value. So this was really the Buddha understood this very well. And that's what he called as really one of the primary sources for suffering and dissatisfaction. And it's simply because we don't understand the nature of the objects. And then it's the next aggregate. So we've mentioned now out of the 5 aggregates, the material form, the feeling, the perception, and then the volition are the reactions that we take in order to get the object that we want or get away from the object that we want. And this is really where the will comes in the sense of the self or the ego. And that particular aggregate is called the Sankara Aggregate. And basically it means all of the sort of choices that we've made in our life, the And the actions that we've done, and it includes emotions and it includes thoughts. Basically, it's the habit formations. It's a result of our habits. And even the urge to scratch is a sankhara. So let's say you have an itch, right? And then you have this unpleasant feel. Actually, the itchy sensation is just a sensation, but you're perceiving it as an irritation. And then the ego is there, and it doesn't like that irritating feeling. And then it wants to scratch or remove it. So it's the actual intention to do the action that's actually the karma. Sankara is really where we create the karma. So this fourth aggregate is really where you're creating a new karma or weakening the old karmic habits. It's the one that's really where we practice the Dhamma in a direct way, is sort of controlling these sankharas. So it's the that will and intention. As I mentioned this morning, when you were doing walking meditation, how many people remember I said, try to see the will or the intention to lift your foot, or to swing the foot forward, or to lower the foot down. How many people think they were able to kind of at least feel a little bit of that, how that was working? The leg is not going to move without some kind of an impulse there. So that will, it's the conscious volition, that is actually the definition of karma. And once you've done that action, that strengthens the neural pathways and would strengthen the habit. So each time you repeat the habit, it strengthens the habit. Whether it's the habit of liking and consuming something, or the habit of trying to push away and not liking something. And these habits, keep growing, and they have since we were a child, all the way up to where we are now. So that is where the karma is created, at this moment of the sankhara, of the intention. But most people don't see the intention because it's a very subtle thing. It's coming up from deep in the nervous system. And because our mind is very dull normally, or it's distracted, we don't clearly see it. We have a vague idea, okay, I'm going to do this, but the actual moment, those subtle tiny little movements, we're not seeing those, we're not clearly seeing those intentions. And that's why they get run together, and it's very difficult to stop it. And that's why only really through mindfulness, when you can note that intention before it's triggered off the synapses, that we have the ability to flip the switch, so to speak. And I'll talk more about that later. So anyway, the sankharas are basically, it's sort of the repository of all of our previous sort of actions and thoughts, although they're not said to be in any particular place, but so they arise each time. And each time we act on it, it strengthens it. And each time we can resist that temptation or change our, restrain our action from it, then we weaken that a little bit. So that aggregate of sankhara is really are the very largest one of those, and that's also intimately connected to that inner tangle. So the sankharas are really the inner tangle of all those, all the feelings, perceptions, and sankharas. They all have the same object. And I know this may sound a little bit over your head, or maybe sound confusing or too intellectual, but actually when you develop the mindfulness and the concentration, and you actually start seeing clearly this process in your mind, it's like, wow, it becomes much more kind of real. And you start seeing the more of an urgency to then try to change some of these, especially the negative sankharas. So all sankharas are not negative, there's also positive ones. In the Dhamma practice, the practice of Dhamma is about both weakening the negative habits that bring suffering and deliberately cultivating the positive habits that help to reduce the negative habits and that bring then more ease, comfort, and so that process of feeling, perception, and volition, this is really where vipassana meditation is focused, about tuning directly into the mind. So it's very different than just practicing, let's say, concentration to enter some kind of absorption into some kind of particular object, or to attain some very deep inner tranquility in which kind of everything kind of disappears and you're just totally absorbed in the state of oneness with some sensation. But it's directly investigating, looking into the mind itself. And that's why the Buddha was called a scientist, or at least he's often referred to that, or I prefer to regard him as a scientist, or even a doctor. But doctors are also scientists in some way. But that was his whole motivation. He took the scientific attitude of wanting to investigate this mind because he wanted to understand the deeper truths about suffering. Because in his definition of the Four Noble Truths, the first noble truth, the definition of suffering was sickness, disease, old age, and death, pain, sorrow, lamentation, and despair. This is the gross level of suffering, and that's the popular level of suffering. If you ask people out on the street, and they would probably say, "Are you suffering?" "Yeah, I've got a disease, something like that, or I'm grieving over the loss of somebody." But the Buddha didn't stop there. He went on to say, then not getting what you want and getting what you don't want is suffering. And then he went on to say, in short, the 5 aggregates of clinging are suffering. So these 5 aggregates are a very integral and intimate part of his, and the deepest level of his teaching on the nature of suffering, and on the opposite, on the nature of happiness. And as I think I mentioned it before, that the Buddha taught about suffering He didn't mention happiness kind of directly. I mean, it's implied, of course, when you talk about the end of suffering. But he just mentioned the suffering 4 times. So why didn't he directly mention happiness? Some religions say, oh, if you follow all these rules, you get born in heaven and have extreme bliss forever, eternity in bliss. And we talk about that, Sat Chit Anand directly. But the Buddha didn't talk about that directly. He talked about suffering. Because a lot of people, they try to do things to be happy. And they may do things to be happy, and they may get some temporary happiness. But at the same time, on the other end, they're doing things under the table that also sow the seeds for unhappiness and suffering. So in the pursuit of happiness, people, may lie, cheat, kill, steal, rape, pillage, and plunder. And they may get some temporary happiness from that, but at the same time, they're doing things that are sowing the seeds for the suffering. So that's not very smart. You think? So the Buddha wasn't interested in that. So he was interested in a deeper level of happiness. So you don't have to do anything to be happy, because happiness is the pure state of the mind. Is a natural, is our birthright, you might say. That means dwelling, being reconnected with the present moment. So all you have to do is to remove the causes of suffering, and then you'll automatically be happy. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to do anything to be happy. You just remove the causes of suffering, and then you will experience the happiness. Although we can do things that help to remove the suffering, which is doing the opposite of those things. So there are so many positive actions that we do, but they're mainly to counter the negative actions. So instead of killing, we protect life and not cause harm to others. Or to avoid stealing, we practice giving and generosity. Instead of telling lies and slandering, we tell the truth and tell the good qualities about others. Instead of intoxicating the mind, we practice meditation. We strengthen the mind rather than weaken the mind. And also, instead of abusing others through sexual craving, we develop contentment with ourselves and not needing that erotic stimulation, because when you get deep into meditation, that's much more fulfilling even than those superficial kind of short-term experiences. So anyway, that is how we in the Dhamma practice, we cultivate those opposite positive actions to weaken the negative ones. But it's actually the overcoming, removing the cause of suffering is, automatically brings the happiness. So that's why the whole meditation practice is about learning how to purify greed, hatred, and delusion. So those are called the 3 roots of suffering: greed, hatred, and delusion. Greed means a strong desire for pleasurable feelings, and aversion means an aversion for painful feelings. And delusion is being deluded, thinking that this material world in itself can bring you ultimate fulfillment. or that even your own ego and sense of self is something concrete and real, and it's, you were born to fulfill that and exercise that ego and so on. And actually, that's part of the idea about Independence Day. So, this whole, we've been talking about the analogy about the Independence Day and being independent from the outer tangle, the inner tangle and the outer tangle, which is really keeping us, under the thumb of our habits and in ignorance. So it's that work on disentangling that tangle that comes in the meditation. So every time when you're sitting to meditate, every time you feel a pain, an unpleasant feeling, you can either strengthen that knot of tangle by, what's that sound? Just shut up. Or just, sleep is so nice. Then we strengthen those knots of the tangle. But if we can exercise mindfulness and just be aware of feeling, and then we examine it. What is this feeling mean? Well, actually, according to Einstein, it's just atoms and molecules going like this, right? Producing friction. In other aspects of the investigating, seeing how the anicca, seeing how things are impermanent, and if you wait 5 minutes, the thing is going to change and not bother you anymore. So why waste your energy struggling to change it when it's going to change anyway? At least there's so many of them. So there's different ways we investigate. So the mind will not increase that particular sort of habit or reaction, and we can let go of that particular impulse and then decrease a little bit that particular habit or thought. And also the practice of metta is also a practice like that. So to overcome ill will and resentment towards people, especially people that have hurt you or harmed you in some way, or anywhere, or you've been taught from you're younger, stay away from those people, they're bad, they belong to this religion or that race, and so on, right? So, we've absorbed those beliefs. So it's hard to get out of those. So we can, free ourselves from these, just kind of limit ourselves to experiencing the world in the same way that I did with the avocados. So this investigation of Dhamma, as I was mentioning, the Buddha is like a scientist. So this body is considered the laboratory. And the microscope is our concentrated awareness. So that's exactly what the Buddha did. He was wandering all over the place. India, going to this guru and that guru and asking him, what's the truth? What's the truth? And he said, come down here, just concentrate on this light, let it fill up your mind, that's God, or some similar types of ideas. So, really? And he tried that and he mastered it, but he said, I don't know. After he came out of those meditation states, he realized he hadn't really changed too much. He said, I don't know, I don't think this is the truth. So he left them. And that's when he said, I'm going to discover the truth within myself. And he sat down and used his body as a laboratory, developed his power of concentration to the level of an electron microscope or an atom smasher. he was able to tune into this process of impermanence and seeing all of these illusions created in the mind and directly seeing this tangle. He did that through just the way a scientist will look through a high-powered microscope and being able to discover the cause of a disease. It's really hardly any different, except he's using the natural microscope of concentration. But Western science knows nothing about it, really. Because it takes too long for them to develop. So they, by default, they just want to look through regular microscopes, but that limits them in their ability to actually see consciousness. Anyway, so that's what I wanted to Now the last aggregate, there's one aggregate left we haven't mentioned, and that is the consciousness itself. We're going to talk more about that tomorrow. But it's especially that aggregate of the Sankaras and the habits, that's really where we practice Dhamma. It comes down to that. It comes down to that moment of, am I going to scratch that itch? Or am I just going to relax and let that itch play itself out? It's not going to hurt me. And not increase the aversion to it. It really comes down to that point of you can or you can't. It's like, let's say a mosquito is starting to bite you. And you see that, and then maybe you took the precept, should I kill it or not? And you're going back and forth. You start to, no, I won't. And then he bites some more. No. You could go through that for 10, 15 minutes. And then finally you say, you reach the hand up and just about the last minute, and then you change your mind. No. So at least you didn't kill it, right? So at least you didn't do the karma of actually killing it. But you would have liked to. That's the thing. You'd have liked to. So, like observing sila, that's why, you observe the sila, the precepts about abstaining from doing these negative actions. But that only kind of prevents the physical action. It doesn't necessarily remove the desire in the mind. But at least to that extent, it's good. Because, you can have an idea to steal something, but in the end you give it up, and no one's going to catch you and put you in prison for stealing because you didn't steal it, right? You might have had the idea to. So that's still karma in your mind that eventually needs to get purified, but you can't really change the mind that quickly. You can change your physical reactions to things easier than you can change your deep mental habits. And that's why the Buddha started at that level of, practicing the sila. We may talk more about that later. Okay? So if any questions about any of that come up, you can write those down for the questions tonight. And for those of you who are tuning into Zoom,
Wednesday night.
What?
Wednesday we can write.
Maybe if any of you out there who are listening in on Zoom, if you also, a lot of them won't be listening on Wednesdays because they live overseas, but some of them might. But you could ask a question on Wednesday nights, a regular Zoom program.
I send this question and we get it recorded.
Well, we'll see. Anyway. Okay, so let's take a little break to stretch the legs, use the restroom, drink some water. We'll come back and do some standing, walking, and then have our longer sitting again.